All right, well, thanks very much, everybody, for coming along. This introduction is going to be extremely short. You know why you're here. We're here to listen to people who are working on the development or the creation of graded readers in languages other than English. And I'm very pleased that we are finally talking about something other than English. We've been talking about English forever. Our presenters today, as you already know, are Kimberley, Jared, and John, Mitsue, and Sophie. We'll lead off with Kimberley and go through the order. Everybody's got about 15 to 18 minutes or so. Please leave your questions either in the chat window. Please leave your question in the chat window, and at the end, we'll try to get through and answer them. But first, let's get through all the presentations. Okay, so Kimberley, could you please head off? Thank you. All the information you need about the presenters is already in Eventzilla. I don't need to go through it.
Okay, so kia ora everyone from New Zealand, and hopefully you can all understand my odd hybrid accent all right, and we don't have any sound issues, which sometimes can happen on this computer. To give, oh sorry, it's not moving on, there we go. To give an overview of what I will cover, firstly, graded materials for Japanese learners, then potentially useful materials for written L1 speakers, the real vocabulary level of L2 graded materials, and finally the vocabulary level of students beginning their third year of Japanese at my university. So when it comes to finding materials for learners, the biggest challenge is just finding out what is out there that can be used for extensive reading. But another important issue is ensuring that materials have appropriate furigana for students. So some researchers may assert that vocabulary level or grammar or content of the materials is the second most important issue to solve. However, due to the high cognitive burden of kanji and the trap of falling back into decoding rather than reading, the priority is really to ensure materials have furigana so students can actually engage meaningfully with the content of the text. And according to Nara in 2001, research demonstrates that L1 Japanese speakers access kanji phonetically before the meaning is retrieved. And he therefore argues that the grapheme sound connection is a prerequisite for comprehension. That is, if text does not have furigana for our learners, their ability to comprehend it is greatly reduced unless they are very advanced learners. So overall, the situation for Japanese needs improvement, and there are not enough materials developed specifically for L2 Japanese learners. Even though the situation has improved since 2016, it is still the case that learners can't reach a high level of reading proficiency just reading the current graded readers alone. And there are almost as many grading systems as there are publishers of graded readers. So what has been developed so far? Well, there are around 460 graded readers for adult learners of Japanese. But because there are so many systems, it is difficult to integrate the materials into a coherent library for learners. Although there are at least 7 different grading systems, most use the old JLPT list as a base, at least according to my best guess, based on the information available about them. The only group using a vocabulary frequency-based word list is the Sakura graded readers. And they have noted significant differences between their vocabulary list and the old JLPT word list. So this makes me wonder about how well these materials really prepare Japanese learners to read texts written for L1 Japanese speakers. And I also wonder how useful they are for exposing learners to frequent Japanese vocabulary. And according to Yoshimura and Kobayashi, Japanese learners tend to prefer to read physical books rather than online. So that suggests that the low number of printed books will be in high demand in a reading program. And this is what we have found in our extensive reading program. Currently, we have 50 students doing extensive reading in some form at my university, and the lack of printed books has caused quite a few issues. Because graded readers in the first 3 to 4 levels are heavily oversubscribed by learners when they begin reading for the first time in Japanese. There are some other sources of graded materials that have been developed for adult learners, but the basis for the simplification is not clear. I have heard that NHK Easy is pitched at the level of N3 of the JLPT, but based on checking the vocabulary level using Matsushita's JLEX tool, this doesn't really seem to be the case, as news stories can range from a 95% vocabulary coverage level in the range of the first 1,000 Japanese words to higher than the 7,000 word level. There are materials that claim explicitly to be based on the JLPT levels, but I also found quite high vocabulary loads, so I'm not sure what list or grading system they're using to define the vocabulary they use. So with only a limited number of graded readers and other graded materials available, a Japanese extensive program must certainly be forced to rely on materials produced for L1 Japanese speakers in order to provide the range and volume of material necessary for effective extensive reading. It's not just about the lack of material specifically developed for L2 learners of Japanese, it's also that learners of Japanese need Furigana support until they reach quite advanced levels. And even if the vocabulary level of L1 text is low, the materials are unlikely to have the Furigana that learners need. There are two obvious issues with this. Firstly, the vocabulary load of native speaker materials, even for children and young adults. And secondly, there is the effective response of adult learners to reading material written for children and young adults. However, it may be that learners' familiarity with Japanese kawaii culture could lower their resistance to using children's or young adult materials. There are two main sources of L1 Japanese materials that I have collected for use in my research, and also the extensive reading program used with our third-year Japanese students. Firstly, the books listed as suitable and then graded by the NPO Taroku Supporters Group and the L1 Children's and Junior High School graded readers. The native speaker graded readers can be said to be semi-graded in the sense that the vocabulary, kanji, use of Furigana, and grammar has been graded by the publishers to be appropriate to the children's schooling level. But before we move on to the real vocabulary coverage of the graded reading materials, I want to touch on how many words are needed to be known to understand text written for L1 Japanese speakers. So research suggests that to understand 95% of running words in native text, learners need to know 9,500 words. But this is much more than courses cover and much more than L2 graded readers cover. Ideally, graded readers for adult learners would be developed to cover the shortfall, but until then, we must rely on text written for L1 Japanese speakers. And of course, it's important to understand how the vocabulary in the reading materials used compares to the frequency of vocabulary in reading real-world Japanese text. So according to analysis reported by Peterson in 2019, even level 0 graded readers written using a word list only 350 items long may have a 95% vocabulary coverage level of up to 20,000 words. This indicates that the lists used by Japanese graded reader publishers may be more idiosyncratic in their word choices than is helpful for learners to smoothly progress from beginner readers to advanced readers. On the other hand, NPO Taroku supporters are reported to have consulted learner textbooks as part of the development of their vocabulary lists. So if their books include vocabulary that is familiar to students from their classes, that may mean reading level is not as difficult as the data here would suggest. Now, while it is true that there are some very helpful words for learners that are very infrequent in native speaker text, and this may account for some of the discrepancy, it is also clear that there are issues with the choice of vocabulary as used by each publisher. It still remains that these materials are clearly not in line with the overall frequency of vocabulary in native Japanese text. So the situation is slightly better when graded reader publishers use a vocabulary list based on actual vocabulary frequency. But it seems that the Sakura group uses a 90% coverage level to define their grades, which is not ideal. In order to check the vocabulary of L1 children's and young adult novels, I typed up the first 3 to 5 pages of text and pasted it into Matsushita's JLEX tool. And as can be seen, it is also the case that these materials have quite a high vocabulary level, so it is currently unclear at what point they will become useful for learners. I checked the vocabulary level of children's, sorry, I forgot to move the slide on. Anyway, I checked the vocabulary level of the children's graded readers in the same way, and the results of this small sample indicate that it does seem like there are more stories in these series that are within the reach of Japanese learners compared to the general fiction text, although it is not foolproof because even within one book, the vocabulary coverage of stories can vary wildly. So, of course, the main question is not necessarily the vocabulary content of the books, but rather how that matches the vocabulary knowledge of our learners. If we don't know how many words our students know, we can't match them to texts at their level. So the only study that I know of that examined Japanese learner vocabulary knowledge using a test based on actual vocabulary frequency data is reported from a conference presentation by Mitsue in 2014. The study recruited 213 learners from 3 countries and used a 150 item test with a sample rate of 10 words from every 1,000. Mitsue found that learners knew an average of 84.4 words out of a maximum score of 150, meaning they are estimated to know an average of 8,400 words. However, it is difficult to interpret these results because the slides do not give a lot of context. For example, of the learners who scored highly, such as those with an estimated vocabulary knowledge of more than 10,000 words, how long had they been studying Japanese? Were they all Chinese speakers who scored well because they had a substantial knowledge of kanji? At the same time, the test format requires a substantial understanding of Japanese words other than the target word in order to complete it successfully. Finally, the test used a very low sampling rate of 10 per 1,000, which tends to have a very large confidence interval and low accuracy for measuring learners' true vocabulary knowledge, according to Gilstead et al. 2020. In order to conduct research into Japanese learners' vocabulary knowledge at my university, it has been necessary to create my own tests to use with learners. We conducted a test at the beginning of this academic year when students were starting their 3rd year of study. The test consists of 200 items from a systematic sample of the first 5,000 words of Matsushita's 2012 Japanese frequency list, sampling at a 1 per 25 rate, meaning there are 40 items evenly distributed across each 1,000 word level. The test format was a meaning recognition multiple choice, with the Japanese word given in kanji and kana, and the correct answer given in English with 3 dummy answers. Semantically plausible answers form the bulk of the dummy answers due to the semantic clues present in kanji. All versions of the test were checked by several native Japanese speakers who have a very high proficiency in English. So to briefly summarize the results, even after only 2 years of study, students know more vocabulary than I expected, with the test giving estimates of well over 4,000 words for some students. But the most important thing about this data is that even though student scores overall look great, with the class average being around 3,500 words, when you break it down by 1,000 word level, students do not know enough words to read successfully even within the first 1,000 word level, because they are not reaching 95% or even 90% threshold of coverage. So looking at each student in more detail, including if the student is an L1 Chinese speaker or not, you can see there is a huge variety of vocabulary scores. But if we look at just at the students who scored more than 80%, it is mainly Chinese learners, although there are a couple of non-Chinese speaking learners who also score highly. Overall, the Chinese speaking learners' higher vocabulary score is expected due to their kanji knowledge. But if we break it down even further, you can see that even when students score highly, there are large gaps in their vocabulary knowledge. For example, student 3 has an estimated vocabulary knowledge of well over 4,000 words, but does not know more than 80% at each 1,000 word level. Given the range of student scores, there are a number of gaps, and the number of gaps in their vocabulary knowledge, it underlines the importance of actually testing vocabulary knowledge rather than making assumptions based on in-class performance or length of time spent studying Japanese. It shows that even after at least 2 years of Japanese study, most learners in this cohort need to focus on reading materials covering the first 1,000 most frequent Japanese words, even if their raw score is quite high. So to sum up, when implementing a Japanese extensive reading program, these tentative preliminary data strongly suggest we need to ensure that we understand our learners' vocabulary level, knowledge level properly so that we can guide them to the right reading level. It suggests there is a range of material at appropriate vocabulary levels, although not necessarily grammar or content level, but unfortunately you do still need to spend quite a lot of time finding it. And finally, it suggests that there are significant questions remain about the appropriateness of the word lists that Japanese graded reader publishers are using and how useful they are compared to the frequency of vocabulary used in Japanese native speaker texts. Okay, thank you. It's a bit shorter than I expected, but that's all right.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very, very much, Kimberly. That was fantastic. Could we please leave questions to the end so we can get through the presentations? I'm sure that some of the questions that people would have for Kimberly about the Japanese script would be relevant also for John and Jared. And also,
let me just answer your question, Rob. The word is a lexeme, so it's
okay, all right.
single
So
lexemes
again,
rather than
like, yeah, okay. I would like to dig into that a little bit more, but
yeah, sure.
okay, great. Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Kimberly. Can we now move on to John and Jared? Applause for Kimberly. Thank you very much. John and Jared, off you go.
Looks like you're still on mute, John.
Okay, sorry, I tried to play the presentation first, but that did not work. All right, so let me share. Okay, can everybody see okay? Yeah. All right. So just so everybody knows, I am founder of Mandarin Companion, along with Jared Turner, also founder of Mandarin Companion. We do Chinese graded readers. And I am at home in Shanghai right now. Jared is actually on the road. So he is quite literally phoning it in using his phone. And I'll be doing most of the presentation, but I'm sure you guys will enjoy hearing from him as well. So we weren't sure exactly how much information we wanted to share about Chinese, especially as it differs from Japanese. But I think Kimberly's presentation gave me a good idea. So we have a bunch of information on that, and I'll cover it briefly, but if we need to revisit it during the Q&A, that's fine as well. So this is us. Jared and I actually met on bus 96 near Zhongshan Park. I want to test Jared's connection. Jared, do you want to try telling this story? Can we switch to Jared?
Oh, we can't hear him, can we?
Did it not work?
He's not muted, so it must be a setting on the computer or device.
Is it because I'm screen sharing so we can't listen to him?
All right, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yep, now we can.
Great.
Okay, great. So John and I, we met one day. I was going to work on a bus in Shanghai, and as I got on the bus, there was only one seat open, and it was next to the only other foreigner on the bus. Sat down there, and I said, I was just this newbie in China, and I was like, hey, hey, well, I'm Jared, and he's like, oh, I'm John, and he was listening to things, and well, make a long story short, he realized that he wasn't going to get rid of me. He's kind of a grizzled veteran of China. And we ended up talking and getting to know each other just so quickly, and found out we lived in the apartment complex next to each other. Later on, I had the idea to start a Mandarin Companion, which was a series of graded readers in China, in Chinese. And John and I, we got back in touch, and then here we are. So it's been kind of a fun story. We did this about 9 years ago, John. I think we started up Mandarin Companion, and it's been 9 years of bliss. So I'll let John get into it. So it'll be a lot of fun.
All right. So when Jared and I first met, I had already started on building a corpus of Chinese language material to help learners. So we're going to talk about this today, how Chinese characters relate to the challenges specifically related to learning Chinese, and what that effect has on the creation of the material, since we have both the corpus, we have both the standard, and we're creating the materials. We're kind of the full stack there. So we have control over everything, but it's a quite complex problem. So today we're going to talk about our leveling system, which was developed from that corpus I just mentioned, how our stories are selected, which is very important because choosing the wrong story, I believe, can result in a much more difficult graded reader. How new or unknown characters are introduced into stories. So that's simpler than systems that don't use characters. Also the double-edged sword of pinyin. So, you know, this relates to Furigana, which you guys were talking about for Japanese. Quick side note, in university I majored in Japanese, so I am familiar with Japanese, and since it sounds like it'll be helpful, I'll draw some parallels there later on in the presentation. And finally, the writing, editing, and review process required to produce Chinese graded readers that are comprehensible for Chinese learners. Okay, so just a quick primer. You're studying a completely foreign language, which may be Swahili, it may be Chinese. Obviously, one of them is gonna feel a bit more accessible to you as a total stranger to the language. Even if the sounds aren't quite what you expect, at least you can expect something. Whereas with Chinese, even if you have a Japanese background, you're really gonna be at a loss a lot of the time. So we have quite the challenge for creating the graded readers for Chinese learners. As you all know, Chinese is logographic. I don't want to say too much about this because I think we're familiar with Kanji, but let me use this time to draw a few comparisons between Chinese and Japanese characters. So first of all, Chinese does not use Furigana. There's been some research into this, and it seems to indicate that by not using familiar letters, you know, the Latin alphabet, it actually helps learners learn Japanese better because it's Furigana written in kana, not the Romaji. And so in Chinese, although Taiwanese learners might use something that's more similar to Furigana, most learners of Chinese nowadays use pinyin, and that has its own challenges. So the other thing about Chinese, which is different from Japanese, is that especially at the low level, most Chinese characters only have one reading. So it's not true of all Chinese characters, obviously. And even at level 1, there is the occasional character which has multiple readings. But this is a bit of an advantage for us because we can purposely avoid the words that involve characters with multiple readings if possible. Or we can really just take care as to how we introduce the words that involve characters with multiple readings. So you can see this this character on the lower right. I hope it's famous for being insanely complex. And by black hole characters, what we want to illustrate is that some characters offer really no clue. So you might know that some characters are pictographic. So they're supposed to be a picture of something, and sometimes they even look like that thing. Some characters are ideographic. They're supposed to symbolically represent an idea, and you can kind of see it in the character. But the vast majority of Chinese characters are phonosemantic compounds, meaning part of them represents, it kind of gives a small clue as to the pronunciation, and part gives a clue as to the meaning. And two clues put together very frequently do not add up to any kind of clear idea of how to pronounce a character or even what it means. So at a very high level, that does start to become possible in Chinese. You can start to guess how to pronounce a character, and you can often guess what it means, but that's a very high level. So when you're at a low level, that's pretty much impossible. All right, now let's talk about pinyin a little more. So at Mandarin Companion, we frequently use this phrase, the crippling crutch. Jared likes to talk about this. Jared, would you like to jump in here?
Oh yeah, so the pinyin over characters. So oftentimes people might suggest, well, all right, if we don't know the character, well, you can just put the pinyin over the top. But this, when we're putting pinyin over the top of a character, it introduces a number of issues. So especially for learners of their native speaker, if their native language is not Chinese or Japanese or something, that's where they're familiar with Chinese characters. is that any one of you, if you do know Chinese, and Chinese is not your native language, if you see this, it is very difficult to not look at the pinyin. And that's the problem. So I work with teachers who are trying to help their students learn Chinese, and they think, oh, well, we'll just put pinyin over the top of the characters. But it just doesn't work that way. When this happens, and when teachers are doing this for students, what ends up happening is that the students just focus on the pinyin and they do not focus on the characters. They'll try to, but they'll constantly, their eyes are drawn back to the familiar pinyin. And so what happens is that it ends up being a long-term detriment. But it's something that's very common in Chinese culture and the Chinese education system, because Chinese students in school, they are first taught characters, and in the second semester of their first grade is when they begin to be taught pinyin. So it actually is natural for a native Chinese speaker to look at the characters and just ignore the pinyin because it's only there to assist. But when we do it in this way, it becomes, as we call it, the crippling crutch. Now, we do need pinyin, because if we don't have pinyin, it's going to be, well, I don't like to imagine what it's like not having pinyin. It becomes very difficult and onerous to be able to know the pronunciation of a character. But using pinyin over with Chinese learners, as I said, it can be a crippling crutch. It's a double-edged sword. So it's something that we have to be careful.
The other thing about pinyin is, as you can see, sorry guys, I got this little chat window. Can you see that? All right, guys, are you seeing the chat there?
Yeah, we got a question.
Okay.
Please ignore the question.
Okay, so about the pinyin, you can see how the pinyin is over each character, but you can also see how there's no indication about word segmentation here. So if you follow the standard for pinyin correctly, the pinyin should actually be segmented for words. And if two syllables are the same word, they should be connected, and then spaces should delimit the word boundaries. But you can see here that that's not how a lot of traditional Chinese publishers do it. The main reason for this is that pinyin is mainly used for L1 learners, kids. And those kids already mostly know the word boundaries. It's not a big deal for them. And so a lot of times that habit gets carried over into L2 learner materials. So of course, when we do pinyin, we're going to pay attention to word boundaries. Also, we'll follow the pinyin standard of capitalizing proper nouns, that kind of thing. But on some graded readers in Chinese, you won't see that. So stuff like this, it's kind of a double whammy. It distracts the eye, but then it also offers no help as to word boundaries and word segmentation, and also the nature of proper nouns. So when we write a graded reader, the bottom line is we do not include pinyin over every syllable. We do include pinyin for keywords. Okay, so next I'm going to talk a little bit about story selection. So a lot of times when you see graded readers created for L2 learners that are learning Chinese, they focus on the most famous stories in China. These are like the Chinese classics. The Journey to the West is probably the most famous one, also hugely popular in Japan. And this makes sense. It's a pillar of Chinese culture. But if you look at the vocabulary and you really think hard about how to simplify and translate this story into something that is really useful and accessible to L2 learners, you start to realize that it is really hard to do. Like you got the Monkey King, right? And he wears this special gold band on his head that the monk uses to kind of control him. That has a special name that uses characters that are basically only for this. And, he has this special wand with characters and a special name. And then he has this little chant and all these magical spells, and all of them have special names and characters that go along with those special names. It gets to be quite difficult to extricate any of this stuff at a level that an L2 learner can handle. That just isn't ridiculous. So the approach that we have taken with Mandarin Companion is to not do that, not take the traditional Chinese stories, which are rooted in these proper nouns and in these other, verbs and nouns, which are just pretty much impossible to write without these difficult characters. And we do Western stories, which are familiar to the reader, which makes them comforting. And they're also mostly written using everyday vocabulary. So, something like Sherlock Holmes, sure, there's going to be a little bit of detective stuff, a little bit of deducing and maybe some intrigue, but there's not going to be magic, and there's not going to be, monkey kings and wands and that kind of thing. So, of course, we still have to be very careful in what we select. We have extensive conversations about which stories are appropriate for which levels. To give an example of that, a while back, Jared really wanted to do the Jungle Book, and I think he wanted to do it at level 1 or level 2, and I totally had to shut him down because I just started rattling off all the different animals, which you really have to include, because if you don't include those animals, it's really not the Jungle Book. But they all have characters that are only used for those animals. So not only are those characters that are needed for this story, but they're also characters which are not practical and which would not be included in any reasonable list of characters needed by learners. Jay, did you want to say something?
No, it's totally true. And I think something else that's important is there's I guess from us, we always look at a marketing aspect and making sure that we are delivering stories that learners are interested in reading. And in a traditional mindset about, I think, a lot of in education, language education, is that we also really need to focus on the culture. And why that can be important as well. What we also find is really important that we're finding stories that students want to read. And I think everyone listening to knows this, but many times what we find is like if a student is presented with the opportunity to read something that's a Chinese fairy tale versus a Western story they're familiar with, 9 times out of 10, they want to choose a Western story that they're familiar with.
And that's not to say that we won't someday get back to doing, more of the traditional stuff. Oops. But for now, yeah, we're focused on the more familiar stories, which makes the material more accessible, and it really just highlights the relationship between the material and the vocabulary and the characters, and you can't separate it. It would be nice if you could, but the level and the vocabulary and the characters really affects our story selection. So actually, we were able to do a number of very good level 1 stories. The first one we did was The Secret Garden. But when we were at level 1 in the very beginning, developing that standard, I determined that 300 characters was the level we could not go below and actually tell a decent story. It's like 100 pages long, a decent story. And after doing level 1 and some level 2, and Jared and I talked about it a lot, we finally determined that, okay, we actually can go below level 1, but what we can't do is use someone else's story. If we're going to go below level 1, then we have to use a story in which we can control everything, because the characters, the location, all of the vocabulary that are directly linked to the plot, we have to be able to control that. And we were actually able to very successfully make the breakthrough level, aka level 0, a complete subset of level 1. We do allow ourselves to go outside of our level just a little bit. We can talk about that later, but only on level 1 and up. So level 1 is a 300 character standard. And so for the breakthrough level, we were very strict. It was exactly 150 characters and no exceptions. And so breakthrough has been very successful, even though we didn't have those classic stories to lean on. We did do a few stories related to some of the classic stories, like boy Sherlock, when he was a boy, some of the things that happened to him,
John,
when he was a boy in China.
If you don't mind.
Okay. All right. So quick mention on the corpus creation. This was developed by using educational materials, things like textbooks and dialogues created for learners. So we did not use newspapers, we did not use books, we did not use spoken corpora. We used textbook materials. So by leveling using this kind of corpus, this was developed by All Set Learning shortly before Mandarin Companion was formed. We were able to really create a good standard that connected with the learners. All right, so you can see here, this is a tiny section of our text. You can see how we have keywords with little, what do you call those? Little numbers? My mind is going blank. Footnotes, there you go. And so you see that the footnotes have the pinyin and the English, but we do not put pinyin over the characters. We only put it at the bottom of the page, and we only do that for the first occurrence. So if someone learns one of these keywords through the footnote and then they later forget it, then they can check the vocabulary list at the end, which is in, of course, numerical order. And so they can keep track of the words they're learning. Just a quick mention of how we've developed. So we start out by doing everything manually, using Word, creating ebook files manually, hiring a designer to create PDFs, which would then go to the printer. And it was kind of a nightmare. Correcting a designer's layout with every little footnote being done manually was a nightmare. So fortunately, we have migrated to something which is much more automated and still gives us control while also being able to take that horrible, tedious work and give it to the machine.
Could you finish up soon, please, John, so we stay on time?
Yep, I'm on the final slides here.
Okay.
So we've got 3 levels now. We've got 4 level 2, 8 level 1, and 5 breakthrough. So as the levels develop, we're learning more and more. We're still going to do level 3, but we're not quite there yet. Mandarin Companion also has memes. We pride ourselves in being very learner-centric. We're focused on what learners are interested in. Jared is the memer, the chief executive memer. And that is it. So I'm John Pazin. Jared Turner is my partner. We welcome you to get in touch with us, John @ or Jared @ mandarincompanion.com. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. That's really great. Thank you. Great. And on to Mitsue, please. John, would you stop your screen share? Thank you.
I'm trying.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's the way the okay, is it off? All right, sorry.
Oh, can you hear me? And then can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Mitsue. I'm from Massey University, Auckland, New Zealand. So today I'm going to present my paper titled Rocky Road to Increase Japanese Graded Readers. And so in this first slide, I'm showing the image of my Japanese extensive reading website. Okay, I'm going to talk about it later. So first, I just want to talk about Japanese extensive reading. It's very incipient in its practice and research. And then many programs surround this incipient pedagogical and then research context. First, extensive reading in this context is still secondary to grammar instruction and then intensive reading. And also research in this context is not fully supported by theories. But one huge problem is a definite shortage of Japanese graded readers. This is a very crucial problem for extensive reading because learners have to read heaps of easy materials. And then Kimberley before showed me the very sad state of affairs of our context. So what are available at the moment? So Tadoku support us. Tadoku means extensive reading in Japanese. They are pioneers in Japanese graded reader publishing. They have published 142 hard copy graded readers at 6 levels today. And then these are the main materials lots of Japanese extensive reading programs use. So we don't have many graded readers in our context at all, compared to 6,000 or 7,000 graded readers available for L2 English learners. But these graded readers are very beautiful, very nicely done. So you can see this image. I got this image and permission with supporters. And then, so we want to increase hard copy Japanese graded readers, but we have lots of difficulties. And then I can just point out each difficulty. So lack of time. So a few hours ago, Katrina and Matt, they were talking about how they produce their beautiful graded readers and Tadoku supporters. That's what they do for over almost 20 years. As a team, they produce one graded reader. It takes them several months, sometimes at least 3 or 4 months. So they don't have lots of time to produce lots of hard copy graded readers. And next, choosing suitable and possibly intriguing topics. I hate to say this, but almost all of Japanese graded reader writers, they are learners, teachers of Japanese. And then they tend to be mature age lady like me. So we don't have lots of intriguing young spirit topics like a crime or sex or politics or scientific fiction. So it's very PC, politically correct, and in some ways can be a little bit boring. And so market is very bad. I can talk about later. Publishing houses are not very, very supportive. So Tadoku supporters don't have lots of funds. Of course, other small groups are trying to publish hard copy Japanese graded readers, but none of them has enough funds. It's not a very profitable market. And then shortage of writers. Everybody is actually teacher of Japanese. None of them is a professional writers. And this is a little bit new thing. Under the corona, COVID-19, lots of teachers thought we have to make some online materials, including graded readers. So some groups take on board and start making online free graded readers. So some teachers start thinking, oh, we don't have to buy hard copy graded readers. So that creates hard copies bad sales, and then that creates decreased funds for publishing more beautiful hard copies. So it's very sad. And then, as I said, the market is very small. Publishing houses very reluctant to publish Japanese graded readers. They are not supportive. And as Kimberley-san mentioned, there are many suitable corpus or word lists available academically in this context. And then some writers' inability of understanding theories such as word coverage, because everybody is teachers of Japanese, so they are not fully informed of theories of extensive reading. So I just want to extend my sincere gratitude to Miss Makiko Awano and then another anonymous pioneer who gave me this information on January 27th, 2021. So even if the number is small, hard copy Japanese graded reader published by Tadoku supporters, I want to say the quality of them is very, very high. And then the Japanese writing, Japanese language content is in their graded reader is not watered down. And I can say it's a victory of the holistic intuitive approach those Tadoku supporters taking. So this is explained by Dane Bamford 1998. So to show that, to prove that high quality Japanese language contained in the graded reader, I did the same analysis Claridge 2005 did. So if you want to know the details, please read Claridge. It's a very, very fine article, Reading in a Foreign Language 2005. So I analyzed one original literary Japanese masterpiece called Hashire Melos, original, and then its graded reader. So just like Claridge, I analyzed with two different word lists. First, I just said course list. And then when I analyze Hashire Melos original with course list, if you can see the first image, the vertical line numbers, they are frequency. So if you can see the image, you can sort of imagine Hashire Melos original has got lots of variety in terms of word frequency, this Persian, very, very up and down, up and down. And I use the same course list to analyze Hashire Melos graded reader. And then it's very set flat, not many up and down. And then some people might say it's very watered down. The language is very watered down. But when I use a final list, like Claridge did, to analyze the two graded readers she analyzed, I can get this very up and down, seemingly intriguing in terms of word frequency for learners. So I can say Hashire Melos graded readers, the language content in them is very authentic for learners' perspective. So it's a very high quality, and then mainly used in many, many extensive reading program in Japanese, L2 Japanese context. But I still have to say bad things. Their graded readers are rather short, and then therefore they are not ideal for word repetition. That's one of the biggest problems. So this issue was pointed by Paul Nation when I visited him almost 6 years ago, June 11th, 2015. So we have very, very thin, like a brochure sort of books, all Japanese graded readers, very, very thin. So maybe you might see, I just printed out my story. It's like this very, very thin. So you don't get lots of word repetition because the story is very short. And then also, as I said before, the range of their topics, currently available Japanese graded readers topics are very narrow. No scientific fiction or action or crime and those things. So we need more graded readers. Under the corona, many groups decided, okay, we can make at least online graded readers for L2 Japanese learners because publishing houses are not nice for us at all. So lots of graded reader, Japanese extensive website coming, Keishi Yomyom, and then Malaysian people, and then Mongolian teachers making lots of graded readers. And then this is my graded readers, and then Kimberley San's graph actually included mine. And I'm very impressed because we don't provide lots of low-level books. Low-level books are very, very time-consuming to make. But anyway, currently we have 106 online books, and then we started 2017 before COVID. And this is the level 2's image. And then, our website is actually, we invite people to send their story. It's participatory website because I can't produce lots of graded readers. So we ask people, mainly Japanese teachers, give us your story, be a writer, and then make an online debut. But usually they give me 2, 3 stories and they finish. So it's very, very difficult to talk them into writing more. And then currently we use Yasanichi Checker to devise our stories, mainly my story, written supported by my sister. So those stories into 3 levels using Yasanichi checker. We have lots of problems. Before the program, I can just quickly show you. I don't want to take lots of time from Sophie, so I don't want to go through all of them. Just third learner's voice. One learner said, I can enjoy various writers, various stories on Yomimono Ippai. Of course, lots of different stories will be there because we invite people to send their story, and then one group decided to write Korean story, and this student is actually Korean student of Japanese. And she was very happy to see Korean girls book cover on our website. And then another last one from the contributor writer's comment. This teacher was making a book, tried to send a book to our website, and she said she had lots of meaningful interaction about how to teach Japanese as a second language. So it's very meaningful, and I enjoy interacting with contributors and learners. We have lots of problems. One of the problem, of course, the one Yasanichi checker we use is actually aims to rewrite official document from city council or something for foreigners living in Japan. So it's not appropriate for our purpose. So we have to use JLEX. It's a lexical analyzer of Japanese text, and developed by my co-operator, Professor Tatsuhiko Matsushita. I call him Tatsu. So Tatsu's website, and he's actually Paul Nation's sort of apprentice, is a professor now. He has a very good word list, and he based on the very reliable corpus, but we have been very busy, so we are not using this JLEX fully. So we have to start using this JLEX in a very fine way, and so we can have a much finely tuned, more small levels, especially for lower levels. So these are our agenda. So the first one, we have to divide the existing 3 levels into more finer groups. So the Tatsu has got lots of ideas because he's a vocabulary specialist. And so he said, we have to divide the first level into at least 6 levels. Lots of time, lots of work. And then we want to install something like a self-level check tool you can find Extensive Reading Central, Rob's website. That's a very, very good tool. And also, because everybody was talking about pinyin and Furigana, so I don't have to explain about this one. I'm very happy. So some students said, please take off Furigana from your story. So we want to make 1 page. All stories comes without Furigana on Kanji, Japanese logograph. It takes time too. Because everybody's working volunteer. None of us make any money, and then we have our main job, so we don't have time. And then also volunteer people making lots of sound files, but only like a 60% stories covered with sound files, so we want to put more sound files for learners. But most importantly, we have to construct more stories. So I have to think about, this is Mitsue thinking, how can I get Japanese teachers to write more stories and then become online credit reader, writer, make a debut. So lots of thinking. So please wish us luck, and thank you for listening to my presentation. Thank you so much. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Mitsue. That was really great and perfect timing as well.
Yeah.
And so finally we move on to Sophie. Sophie, when you're ready, would you share your screen with us, and off you go.
All right. Hi, everybody. Well, it's kind of nice to go last because I can refer to what everybody has been saying. So in my case, I'm talking about extensive reading in French. So I have less of the issues that people who write for Chinese and Japanese have, because we use the same alphabet. So that's a good thing for me. I think everything else is a little bit complicated, actually. So let me just go to the next. Okay, so how it started, basically for, so let me say this right from the beginning. I was pleased to hear that extensive reading is actually part of how to teach Japanese and Chinese as foreign languages, because as of now, or at least as far as I know, it is not the case for French. Or when it is introduced as extensive reading, it is not extensive reading at all. It's more you have the page in French and then the translation in the first language. And in what I've seen so far, it was Japanese. So clearly, we don't have this how would I say that, this way of thinking about how to teach French. So very disappointing. And on top of it, even if people were interested, the market, the publishing market, has nothing that would be adequate for true beginners. So a couple years ago, and I've just rechecked, and it hasn't changed much, sadly. For French publishers, there's almost nothing. The two most famous ones are Hachette and Clé Internationale. And another one that is popular in Japan, because they're doing graded readers for English as well, is Black Cat. So yes, I read all the first chapters of Black Cat at A1 level, and I can confirm that it is impossible to start true beginners on what is currently available. And I just want to show it to you. So this is from Clé Internationale, and it is a famous story, Jules Verne. And this is what they expect true beginners to be able to read. And since I'm assuming most of you don't speak French, you can see how that's literally impossible to do. And Black Cat is slightly better. It has at least illustrations. But even if you just look at the left page, page number 6, words like bandit, okay, for English speakers, easy to understand, but then hors la loi, which is the same thing, it's just a repetition. Terreur, okay, English speakers, you can guess. But imagine for Japanese speakers, these words are completely impossible to understand, and they are not explained either in the activity page. So literally, if you want to help French learners to start learning French through extensive reading, or help them learn French with extensive reading, that's just not going to happen. So I want to say right away that Rob hasn't paid me to say this, but I looked for graded readers that I could translate from English into French. And honestly, his Cengage Foundation Reading Library series is the only one that felt right to do. And so, and I have used them actually. So I know they work for true beginners. And for that simple reason. So on the left side, you have the English, and on the right, you have the French. The amount of words is limited, and the picture is supporting what is said below. So that's the first thing that makes a huge difference compared to everything else that I've seen on the market. So yes, I've been using them. Actually, I don't teach French anymore. So I do have a private student, so I have been using it with her, but in the context of a classroom, I haven't been using it. But from my past experience, I know that students benefit from using graded readers in French. And because, as I said, there is no tradition of extensive reading in teaching French, you have to convince French teachers that it is helpful beyond getting better at reading. You have to show to them how you can use a graded readers to actually teach other things. And this is what I had to do actually at my former university. I was using graded readers to actually teach writing. So I just want to show you a few things that I've noticed for students. The first one is grammar. Basically, with graded readers, you can actually show students how the grammar and vocabulary can be used. French is still very much taught with the grammar translation tradition in most countries, not just Japan. And so how can I say, all these grammar classes don't expose them to real life examples. And I know fiction is not real life, but my God, between a rule and a story, for me, the story is so much closer to real life. So, and most of the time what students realize is that what they're learning in their grammar classes is useless when it comes to communicating. And I just want to show you this because it's just very funny. So just spare me the moment. Usually we make a big deal. I don't, because I never teach grammar, but there's a big deal around teaching the difference between masculine and feminine and singular and plural, right? Because we have that system in French. Except that when they start listening to a story, they hear that the word here, which means kind, is said exactly the same way, whether it's masculine, il est gentil, or, sorry, feminine, elle est gentille, plural, ils sont gentils, masculine plural, and then feminine plural, elles sont gentilles. So students all of a sudden realize, oh my God, all the things I'm learning actually don't really matter when I want to communicate because we don't say them in French, they're just there. And that has helped actually increase students' motivation to learn French, because to tell you the truth, I'm not teaching French anymore because it's a pain to teach. There are so many rules and yet so many things that you don't actually pronounce when you're communicating. So when students realize that through a graded reader, they're like, oh, okay, so I don't need to be obsessed with that grammar. I can actually try to increase my fluency over the total accuracy of where you put double LE or an S or whatever, right, for the grammar aspect. And also, so as I said, grammar, it's a huge thing for students, but also it convinces teachers to use graded readers. And basically in Japan, at least, even though it's a 4-year degree, literally the last year they have almost no French classes. So they have 3 years to be proficient, starting mostly from 0. With the graded readers, once they've read it, I used to actually do explicit vocabulary teaching, but always in context, because we've read the story, and also I make them practice within the story. But for the words themselves, I created a Quizlet system so that they could practice those words, and they like it because they're familiar with that way of learning a language. But then, as I said, I would bring them back into the context and make them use the sentences in context. Pronunciation, so they would either listen to me or to a recording. So they would get the oral input, and they would also read aloud themselves, which is a huge thing as a learner, as a language learner, that I've been recently reminded of, because I have been learning Italian and actually practicing the jaw movements that go with speaking another language is pretty important. And also students feel less threatened, maybe that's too strong, shy, to actually say something in another language. And also writing, because as I said, that was actually the purpose of the class when I used Rob's graded readers. I was supposed to teach students how to write in French. So the writing prompts, I haven't invented anything. Change of the end of the story was a very the most favorite for the students, and also the key scene. So I would either be reading or they would be listening to a recording, and then it would stop and they would have to invent what is happening, usually at the beginning with the picture from the book. And later on, when they got used to it and the language was less of a problem, so they could focus on creativity, then without the picture. So I just want to show you an example. So this is, I actually can't remember the title in English because I'm still working on them right now. So I'll explain that later. But so basically page 13 is a great part to change, to stop the story. So there is more to come in the original story. So I stop it there and I ask students to decide what is being said, and then give them 2 more pages of pictures, and please write what you think. And so I know you probably might not understand French, but if you do, or have some basic knowledge, just the fact that students can write that much after 2 semesters of French. I had students from year 2, to me is amazing. I never expected this. And actually, the grammar isn't that bad. It's far from perfect, but the message is conveyed. And what was so interesting for me is that students looked up for words. So they increased their own vocabulary through this process. So something that was really powerful. So I wanted to show this to you because I wanted to make it clear why I thought this was extremely valuable to teach French. So the next part is what was written in my abstract, which is how I translated this Language Foundation Reading Library series. Basically, I think it's what most people do when they're translating. I just used Rob's stories, read them, translated them page by page, and then I let it sit for either a couple of hours or maybe sometimes days. And then I only read the French version to see if it sounded right, if it sounded French. I am bilingual, so sometimes my brain, gets a little confused. Oh, no, that is French. And I'm like, no, that's not. This is just English translated into French. And then I did ask another French speaker to read the story, and that French speaker does not speak English, to make sure that if something didn't quite sound French, they would point it out to me. And then I went through the grading process. And so for that, I had some nice thoughts when my predecessors were talking regarding the lack of grading system. So that was another issue with the French graded readers published. There was no indication of how they graded these books. And that to me was a huge issue, because how do you know the real level? For me, that's, you can write level 1, but if you don't tell me how you graded that thing, to me, that's not a real level. So that was a problem for me too. And thankfully, because Rob, I'm sorry, Rob, if I'm making your head explode, but he's done an amazing job. And French and English being very close languages, the changes were minimal, right? So for the vocabulary, I used the vocabulary profiler Lex Tutor. So let me just share what it looks like. So that's another Rob who's done it, but Rob, it's Tom, sorry, not Rob, Tom Cobb. And so he's done it for French, and he has it also for Spanish, just so that you know. And basically, you paste the text, you copy it in there, and it comes out as, let me go back to my PowerPoint. Yeah, so just give me a sec. That's always the problem with Keynote when you've been in share mode. Okay, share again the screen. Oops, here we go. I want to show you what it looks like for Sarah's surprise, which in French became just a surprise. So that's how it comes out, right? So 1K, 2K, 3K, and then off list. And so, sorry, so for the 1K words, since French and English are so similar, Rob had done a good job already. So they were either explained or they're easily understood in context. Pretty much the same thing for the 2K type, except for machine and revoir, but machine is a coffee machine and ice cream machine, so it's easy to understand from context. A revoir is actually part of the expression au revoir, which is goodbye. And this is something most learners learn within a week. The 3K words, again, the only one is salut, which is hello, a greeting that is also learned very early on. And for the off list, you see a lot of proper names. So those don't matter. And so they were either explained or I added them to the vocabulary page, which for the French version looks like this. All right, for grammar, same thing, because the work was properly done originally. There was only one subordinate sentence. I kept it this way and decided to use it as a grammar review or a grammar point in my writing class. Otherwise, all the sentences are built on subject, verb, and nominal complements, which make it super easy for students. And it's funny, sorry about that. And present tense. French is a pain when it comes to conjugation, so everything being in the present makes it extremely easy. Last but not least, English is okay with repetitions. I was worried because French does not do well with repetitions, but because of the way it's done in the original, they could be maintained while keeping it sounding French. And my example is from page 3. It's when Sarah starts to work at the lagoon today, and then page 4, she starts to work today. So very easy to translate into French. So regarding proper names, I just wanted to say a word about that. I either kept the same if it was common in French. So for instance, Sarah is completely normal in French, or if they were clearly foreign, so Jingsu for oh yeah, it is still in Sarah's surprise, or trendy. Yeah, lagoon is also something that French people use. It's an English word, but no problem. If I had to change, then I actually relied on 2 websites to see the popularity, to make it relevant and for students once they do go to France. And I'm sorry, I realize I'm being France-centric, because there is French-Canadian in there, but I did not take that into consideration. So for instance, Mrs. Hayes becomes Madame Amon. So because of the HA thing, and it's quite a popular name in France. Regarding pictures, culturally speaking, there are very little differences between English, well, I'm guessing American more culture, or British culture with France, so only very minor changes. I had to erase some things that would not make sense in French, and also as a way of making it easy, I completely erased the board that had the actual price and names of food items. So I'll finish with this. It's been a battle to get the books published until Paul Goldberg, and thank you, Paul, for being here today, stepped up to the plate, and with X Reading offered to have it published. So I won't go through the whole detail, but some of you know, because it's been going on since 2014. It was just, I just want to say that I am eternally grateful to Paul to have made it possible. And so we're both working on getting all 6 levels translated and uploaded to X Reading. And at least my goal, I'm not sure, Paul, how he feels about that. I haven't asked him, but it's summer 2021. And as of now, it's not visible yet, but I've translated 3. Well, I've given Paul 3, and he has this week put it up on X Reading. I guess not visible yet for everybody, but that's what it's going to look like. So thank you so much, and I am done, and I'm sorry I'm 47 seconds over my time.
Not a problem. Thanks very much, Sophie. That was fantastic. Thank you. Everybody give a round of applause. So thank you to the 4 presenters. Let's go through the questions starting at the very top. I believe the first question was from me, but I'll skip that for the moment. I got a quick answer from Kimberley. Patrick asked, for Kimberley, how do we deal with kanji knowledge as a facet of word knowledge?
What I meant by that is just, you might be able to deal with a whole lot of vocabulary, but then when it gets on the page as kanji, all of a sudden you can't access it anymore.
Furigana. All of the books basically have Furigana. I think there's like a definite like resistance among some Japanese learners and teachers for the usage of Furigana. They're like, oh, it's just cheating, students won't learn, blah, blah, blah. But to be honest, in my experience as a Japanese learner myself, once you really start to know the kanji very well, you don't notice the Furigana when you're reading. So it is I think it's a support, a scaffolding. It's not a permanent crutch, I don't think so.
I was more kind of interested in like the concept of Rob was asking what do you define a word as, and how you could have the word as a kanji be completely inaccessible while the word in hiragana or katakana is accessible. So
I have
how does
them
that
side
affect
by
your
side.
definitions?
Yeah, I just have them side by side in the test. So that way it takes into account learners' vocabulary knowledge, not just their kanji knowledge, but also provides a pronunciation where the pronunciation is necessary to separate two different meanings of that kanji. For example, like there's like, I keep getting these mixed up, but there's like the word for like translate in Japanese, it also can mean mistake, and you need to provide the kana anyway to differentiate which meaning you're actually asking learners to, provide the English definition for.
I'm just curious, are you planning to do what Jared and John have done, which is to put spaces between words to make it easier for people, particularly at the lower levels?
I don't make materials, but the materials
or
that we have,
would you put
they
spaces?
do tend to have spaces between what's called the bunsetsu, like so the word and its any accompanying particle.
Yes.
I think in level 0 readers.
Have to be. So you take the same approach?
One moment. Let me have a look. It's not a good idea. But Mitsue, if you have like a response, please, while I look up if these have spaces between the words.
Putting the space between words is a very fine work. And so even teachers of Japanese, we sometimes don't have clue. So it's very tricky. So I just have to escape with the answer. One time, because I put too many spaces, and my colleague said, Mitsue, you put far too many spaces, and it's very difficult to read. So even we can't decide, and so it's a very fine work. And then I don't know. Yeah.
This one, it doesn't have, I don't know, it's gonna interfere. They don't seem to have them, but I know that the NPO Taroku supporters that I have seen some of their books, they have the bunsetsu spacing, but not for these ones that I have downloaded from online and printed out, because my students just really dislike reading online materials.
So the next question is from David. He asks, Kimberley, do you have any view on whether it would be possible to replicate my research with Takagi-sensei in the case of Japanese extensive reading? That is there a way to create fake Japanese characters to be using graded texts? Maybe, David, you could sort of disambiguate that a little bit. I don't know if Kimberley is familiar with my research.
I did quickly look it up because I think I've seen it, but I just put
David,
the
would you
reference
disambiguate
in here.
that a bit for her, maybe?
There is a reference, Mikami and Harada, about 10 years ago, they did something similar, not with fake words, but with words that readers were unfamiliar with. And then they read the graded readers, and then they saw how many words they picked up. And I think the word needed to be encountered between 4 and 8 times to be acquired from the graded reader. But the issue with Mikami and Harada's research was that it was like a immediate post-test. I don't think they had any significant period of time of delay.
Rob's study was a 3-month delay, I believe.
Yes, there was a 1 week and there was a 3 month. Yeah,
I think Mikami and Harada, they would have been within the same week. I can't remember off the top of my head. Maybe Mitsue Sensei knows.
So thank you so much. So in the following answer, somebody wrote that, was it you, Kimberley, Vietnamese kanji?
No, I haven't.
Who wrote that?
Kanji. There must have been a private chat to you, because I can't.
So yeah, I wrote that, David. I've used there's in Vietnam they used kanji for around 100 years ago, and there are several kanji which look like kanji, but nobody in Japan knows them because they're not Japanese kanji, and probably also no one in China knows them either. And I've used those in class to demonstrate coverage by taking a Japanese text and taking out first one character in 100, and then two characters in 100, and then three, and to show the students what 99% or 98% or 95 or 90% coverage looks like.
That's fantastic. So Kimberley, Mark, Rob, I mean, I think that Rob's work with Takaki Sensei is so influential. I think it really needs to be replicated. And one reason I think so is there could be the possibility that Chinese people with the ability to decode, to recognize and decode characters, it might mean that compared to Rob's Japanese learners of English, there might be a difference in the number of repetitions necessary to learn the words.
I think, to be honest, if a learner cannot decode phonetically the character, then they're just going to go along and be like, you know, honyarara o tabemashita, you know, and it's not, then, so they're just going to, and then the next time they encounter like a fake kanji, they'll just call it honyarara as well, you know, so it won't.
So there could be a much longer lag towards, even if you had phonetic transcripts of Furigana, it could take much longer. And so there could be a difference in the time towards incidental learning of vocabulary in the case of English learners learning Japanese than the opposite.
I'm not sure. I would love it if somebody did this research. It would be very fascinating. I don't have time because I have my own PhD research, which I didn't talk about in this presentation.
Sorry, Jared, do you have an idea about how many words how many times you need to meet words in or characters in Chinese to pick them up, incidentally or intentionally? John, Jared, any idea? Because that affects how frequently you're going to put them in your materials, right?
Right. There's definitely research on that. Getting back to the question of word frequency versus character frequency, we definitely defer to characters rather than words. So when I mentioned our levels, I mentioned how many characters were in each level. And so by focusing on the characters, then you open up this kind of can of worms. Well, are you controlling the words or are you just controlling the characters? And we are trying to control both, but we're focused on characters first and then words. And we're kind of leaning a bit onto existing standards for things like textbooks, for the characters that the learners should already know from their studies, rather than purely based on exposure through our own texts.
Yeah. But so do you know how long it would take somebody to learn a new character, for example? How many times, if you were just meeting it from reading, would you pick it up after 5 times, 10 times, 20 times without referring to it?
Roughly 10 times is kind of the standard.
In Chinese too, okay.
It varies, especially for characters that are not so frequent. You know, if that's 10 times over 6 months, then
yeah. Well, John, words it can take 100, right? Some, if it's a cognate, it's very, very easy, right? If it's not a cognate, it makes it much more difficult.
John, is that in the case of English first language speakers learning Chinese?
The 10 times?
Yeah.
Yeah, that number is mostly applied to words. And I think when you have a number like that, it's frequently assumed that the characters that make up the word are known, but the word itself is not. So then, since most words are 2 characters, then you have all these other situations. You know, what if you know one of them but not the other? Or what if neither of the characters is familiar? And so it's really kind of a mess. But it's the reason why we focus on characters as the unit, which, you know, is primary for determining our leveling system.
Right.
And we have to take all of that into account when we decide what is allowed in each level, what words we're going to use in every story. It's pretty complicated.
Yeah, well, characters are generative, whereas words are not, right? So characters are going to appear in lots of different words. Yeah. Does anybody else have another question?
I just wanted to, David, you also had, what is the most influential Japanese word list so far? By far, it is the old JLPT word list, and there's no relation to the frequency of words in native Japanese text, according to Matsushita. But hopefully people will work on ones which are more in line with actual Japanese frequency. Yeah.
So is there any frequency list existing right now?
Yes, there is. Let me So there is this one, which is the one that I used, which is, it goes to 20,000 words.
Is that
Sorry,
shareable? Is that publicly available?
Oh, yeah, this is publicly available. This is data that accompanies Matsushita's 2012
If you have a link to
2011
that, would you-
PhD.
If you have a link, would you? Thank you.
Yeah, let me just look that up for you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Any other questions from anybody?
Sorry, the word list is based on the National Language and Linguistic Institute modern language written Japanese word, and then also the one like anti-agony column coming with Japanese Yahoo website, and then so Matsushita touches my friends, and then so he uses like those very reliable corpus. And so it's quite reliable. And then the JLEX lexical analyzer, online lexical analyzer of Japanese text I mentioned in my presentation. The website tool is based on his word list. So if you have to deal with Japanese text, I strongly recommend to use JLEX. If you just type it JLEX, you can get the tool. It's just like a Pollination's range. Very similar.
I've got JLEX much. Here we are. JLEX is here. I'm still trying to find. I did have a open for Tatsuhiko, but I'll just look it up.
I don't know if anyone would be able to answer this, but I'm a little bit curious on what the rationale for the JLPT list is if it's not following frequency.
I think it was. They basically just got a whole bunch of newspaper articles and by hand sorted the words out to the most frequent one, is what I have read.
Okay, so Kimberley, just I see here that you got the access to the Japanese text analyzer. I'm talking about the actual spreadsheet list that you have.
Yes, yeah, I've just put that in there now.
Okay,
so it just took me a little bit longer to track it down.
Right, Todd's got his hand up. Todd, you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick, it was great, all those presentations. I was so excited because I do something similar in English, but with extemporaneous speech. And I've been screaming this from a mountaintop for like 10 years. And then Rob found me. You know, a lot of the stuff, your problems, word repetition, phonology, lack of materials for writers, hard to find real life examples. If you just speak, just talk, transcribe the speech, put it on a PowerPoint with audio, it's done. And I would love to do, like maybe with Mitsue or Kimberley, if you'd like to do like a graded reader exchange, all students have to do is talk for like 1 minute. They transcribe what they write. They put a picture to kind of gloss it up. Then they put the audio on the PowerPoint slide. And I think students could exchange these readers. But if you take a TED Talk and you put a TED Talk into a suffer rating tool, it's going to come up at about B1 because humans cannot talk that complex when they're speaking extemporaneously. So anyway, I'm going to write all of you. I think you all did a great job. And I think this is amazing. I just wanted to point out about extemporaneous speech.
I think we're sort of, time is up now. Mark, do we have our people in this room after us?
Yeah, I think it's
Mr.
Paul
Goldberg.
doing his talk.
It's don't worry, it's only Paul.
It's only Paul. Yeah, don't worry about him. If people want to continue this
After
conversation,
Paul,
I think
there's
maybe
nobody in
after
the
Paul's
room, I'm pretty
session,
sure.
we can go to the lobby. There's an extensive reading room there, and we can
stay here after Paul. But there's
after Paul
panel. There's a panel discussion. There's a panel discussion after Paul's session.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. So
I'm going to stop the recording. Let me stop the recording. Thank you very much, everyone.
I just want to say thank you very much to our presenters, really, for the time and effort you put in. That was extremely informative. Thank you so much for your time and your effort. And is there anything you need to say on behalf of our SIG?